You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio. Welcome to the Bitter Medicine Podcast, where it's all about Black empowerment. Our show focuses on Black news and entertainment, arts, science, economics, history, people, and strategies that uplift, empower, and motivate Africans within the diaspora. And now, your host, whose favorite color is black, Goku.
Welcome back to the Bitter Medicine Podcast. This is your host, Koku. On today's show, we want to talk to a person, a woman of color, a black woman, who is involved in several different initiatives that I think everyone should hear. One of the things that I always wanted to do with this show is highlight the people and the activities that you don't see in the mainstream. And today we have someone on who will shed some light on some of the work that she's been doing in areas that we don't really hear about, again, in mainstream media. Before we get to that, though, I want to do my free business shout-out. Once again, my free business shout-out goes out to Stephanie Renee's Salon, located at 1614 West Main Street in Kalamazoo, Michigan, zip code 49006. Stephanie Renee's Salon is conveniently located inside Cali Beauty. So if you want to give Stephanie Renee's Salon a call, you can call them at 269-459-6535. That's 269-459-6535. Once again, Stephanie Renee's Salon in Kalamazoo, Michigan. Also, I want to thank everyone who's donated to the GoFundMe that we have for this podcast to purchase more efficient podcasting equipment, as well as to be able to pay for social media marketing so that we can increase the visibility of this podcast. Please, if you can, just for the price of a cup of coffee, if you can donate to our GoFundMe, which we are running from now to mid-June. We're just trying to raise $2,000 to be able to, like I said, improve upon the podcasting equipment, which improves upon the show, as well as marketing the show on social media, which improves our visibility. Without further ado, let's welcome our guest today. Our guest today is Natasha Roberts. She is, or has been, a teacher. She has several initiatives going on, one including fellowships or outreach for political prisoners. Let's welcome Natasha Roberts to the show. Natasha, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Hi.
How are you?
Hi, I'm fine, thanks. Thanks for appearing on the show. We actually met at an event. We met real briefly, but we met at an event that was hosted by Onitase of the Pro-Black Experience podcast. I don't know, have you had a chance to hear the Pro-Black Experience podcast yet?
Yes, I have.
Okay, yeah. So we met at that event, that community event, and it was at that event you mentioned that you do some work with political prisoners, and I thought that was interesting because I haven't heard people talk about much outreach initiatives for political prisoners in some time. When I was a college student, like I told you before, in the late 90s, I remember attending several marches in Harlem and stuff like that for Mumia Abu Jamal and other political prisoners. But I haven't heard about that kind of stuff really since that time. So it was kind of cool to hear about it. And also, if I'm being very honest, it was cool to see black women at a black conscious event. I feel like usually when I see black women at those type of events, it's kind of a religious type thing, and this was a non-denominational type thing. This wasn't religious at all. It was just an event. It was you and your sister and two other black women that were there, and I thought that was pretty cool. Black women were half of the audience, and I thought that was real cool. So, Natasha, can you inform the audience about you? Tell them about yourself.
Well, as Koku said, I am an educator. I have traditionally been teaching in the public schools for the past 7 years, teaching social studies and to high school and middle school kids. I recently quit, however, because of the miseducation that our students receive within the public schools, and not wanting to be a part of that, knowing that our kids, our African kids, depend on us to help foster within them a sense of pride and a sense of power, that they can really be able to do the things that we need them to do in terms of continuing the work for the struggle, the protracted struggle that we're in. And so I know, and I think many people know, that the public school systems don't do that. And even though I was making sure to include as much of our progress and all of the things that we've done and the resistance that we've put through and the accomplishments that we've done within the public schools, because of all the different things that come at you, you're not able to really be able to give them the kind of education that they need. So I stepped out of the classroom at the end of last year to start to create my own organization that's going to be Alamu for Liberation, where I will be creating an after-school program and being an educational consultant to get into the schools to be able to teach African-centered education and do it as an after-school program, which will eventually become its own school. And then I also do work with political prisoners, as Koku mentioned. I'm part of an organization that raises money to support their legal fees, their families, and also then behind the walls, also creating campaigns to get them out and supporting them in all the different ways that we can. Also visiting them and going to marches and rallies, all of the different ways in which that you can support a political prisoner and teach other people about them as well. So I do that work. And then I have a business that I've started up with my sisters called Melanin Mavens, where we do different events and content to help connect African people to their African history, whether it's African people in the diaspora or on the continent, connect to the African history that they don't know and haven't been taught, but in ways that are fun and creative.
So you are an example of the kind of people I always wanted to have on this show. A lot of people, they want to run for the named people, the people with a name inside the so-called conscious community. But I wanted to show people that regular folks, you and I and others, are out here doing work. I mean, actual work out here. We're not pushing sermons. We're not pushing DVDs. We're just doing absolute work. And I really appreciate everything that you're doing, and I intend in this podcast to find out and flesh out a little bit more and see if there's ways that people who might be listening to this show can actually help you in your endeavors. So, number one, you mentioned the fact that you left the public school system because you felt like, I guess, it was containing you too much. You weren't allowed to do what it is you really wanted to do, to convey what it is you wanted to convey to the black youth in school. If you don't mind me asking, how is it that the public school system kind of kills that kind of freedom? Like, what is it that they do intrinsically that prevents someone who's a black person who's African-minded, who wants to push like an African core curriculum type thing? How do they really kill that?
Well, the way in which they do it is first through the curriculum. So let's say as a social studies teacher, you have to teach to the social studies curriculum that's mandated by New York State and also by the district that you're in. And then once you have to follow that curriculum, and then that curriculum is also on the state, whatever state test that they have to take. And then within that curriculum are a lot of, one, falsehoods and mistruths. And then two, you have a certain time frame in which you have to finish the curriculum. And they want you to pretty much stick to the curriculum that they have. They don't really want you to go off of it, and they don't want you to say anything that goes against it. So when we talk about, let's say, Christopher Columbus discovering America, you have to talk about, the Columbian Exchange, how Christopher Columbus came to the Americas and, discovered America and all these things, which we know isn't true. And then they reinforce that type of negative mistruth on the test, and then they want you to teach that in the classroom. Like for me, I still brought in the fact that, he did not discover America, that Ivan Van Sertima wrote the book, They Came Before Columbus. I let my students know that, there was a huge African presence within the Americas even before Columbus came around, and, that he even didn't even step foot on the actual North American continent. So types of things like that. And then also just I don't want to say over-representation, because I think that's even a small word, but it doesn't really express to the amount in which they have everything basically lined up so that it seems like Europeans have done everything. So that you're sitting there as a black child, as an African child, and thinking well, what did we do? And I've had students say to me, Ms. Robert, I didn't know that. Or when I teach them about, the things that we've done, or if we're on a subject and they're like, well, can we learn some more about black people? So we know that they want to know more about themselves, but the curriculum sets it up in a way in which they're barely shown, unless you're talking about slavery or the civil rights movement.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's pretty much it, So I had to, even when I was teaching global history, instead of teaching about, just colonialism and, how they came in, when you're teaching about colonialism, they're not really telling you to teach about all of the resistance movements that existed, all of the how many people were involved in the resistance. And so all of those different things are set up within the curriculum so that you are not able to really teach them in the way that you want. And when you do start to do it, it's a challenge, because you'll then have your principal challenging you, and you'll have, the head of your department challenging you. And there's been, if people look it up, there's been plenty of accounts where African educators have taught specifically African-centered education within the public school classroom, and have been vilified, fired, and harassed, all of those things because of that. And so you come across a lot of different barriers when you are doing those things. And so even though, within my classroom, I was incorporating a lot of our history into it, I didn't want to just have to incorporate our history into it. I want to really be able to teach them a really full curriculum of what we've done, because that's what they need. Because they're going to get what Europeans have done anyway. They're going to get that within their everyday lives, because we live in a European-controlled and dominated system. And then it's just reinforced within the classroom. So I think it's important that when they're learning and you're educating them, that they get to see the huge role that we've played in history, and we continue to play.
Mm-hmm. That, for those who are listening, that is exactly what Carter G. Woodson talks about in The Miseducation of the Negro. You get these curriculums that have no representation for you as a student. And so, of course, you start to get that inferiority complex, because you don't see yourselves in any of these great stories. And when you do, you see yourself as the loser in these stories. You mentioned the African presence in America before Columbus even came here. And no one talks about it. No one talks about it whatsoever. People try to treat it like it's fringe science or something like that, or fringe history, something made up. So it's very, the system of white domination is very keen on boxing you in on all sides. So they box you in on the education side, they box you in on the economic side, and you know, I wonder what it will take ultimately to get us out of this. You mentioned that you, in this new business endeavor that you're doing with education, that you eventually want to start a school. Was I correct in that?
Yes.
So you've heard of Dr. Umar Johnson, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Please don't be like Dr. Johnson, where you're talking about building a school and we still ain't see a school yet. But and I actually like Umar Johnson. I think he gets involved in too much petty stuff now. But I think the idea of a school is a good one. Can you tell us a little bit more about your idea of a school?
Yes. So I really like the way in which Amos Wilson approached education and his whole theory behind educating our children and the brilliance of Black children and how to harness that and how to help cultivate it. So for me, I want to create a school in which our students are being prepared in a well-rounded way to carry on the work that we're doing and to solve the problems of our people, as Amos Wilson says. That's the purpose of education,
right,
is to solve our people's problem and ensure their survival.
Right.
And so since we're in these schools and we're constantly being taught how to fix and solve the problems of Europeans, we're never getting to our issues. We're not figuring out how to address our issues in an African-centered way in which that will ensure our survival.
Mm-hmm.
So teaching them their history, getting them to first identify themselves as an African person, because that's the first thing. Because actually the other day I was in a school and I was working with a group of students, and I had a head wrap on. And so the little boy looks at me, he was in 5th grade, and he says, "Are you African?" I said, "Yes." "And so are you?" And he said, and his hair is like as nappy as mine, like, skin tone. And he said, "No, I'm not." And I said, "So what are you?" He said, "I'm Irish."
Oh, wow.
And so I looked at him, like, okay, you're kidding me and yourself. This was toward the end of the day. You happen to say that to me, but this is what our students are faced with. Not wanting to identify that they're African, not believing they're African, and not believing that Africans even did anything great that they would want to associate themselves with it. Because even when I was teaching my students who were 15 and 16 years old about how Africans came before Columbus, you had to get them to believe that because of how inferior they believe Africans are, that they wouldn't even believe that African people would have done that.
Yeah.
They want to know, how. And, rightfully so, you're obviously going to tell them how, but they're in their mind that it's so against what they've been taught about African people that it just wouldn't make any sense. So getting them to identify as African first, because once you identify yourself as an African, then you know that there is a different kind of work to be done. That instead of, looking to be accommodated within the system, you're looking for liberation. So, and you have to solve the problems of your people in order for you to get there. And so how do you get there? So that puts you in a whole completely different mindset about how to carry yourself as a student, about the morals you have, about how to be an upright person as African people are, and how to step away from all of those negative images that have been created and stereotypes that have been created for you as an African person and for you to fall into. And also, that would allow you to understand that, you need to be different than what even Europeans are doing, because you now understand that you're not a European person, that you're an African person. So the way that you are, your culture is different.
Mm-hmm.
And so it looks different. And then once they understand that, then teach them more about continue to teach them more about their African history, the things that we've done, the accomplishments that we've made, how our culture is, getting them to really understand their culture, and then also addressing some of the things that have been instilled with them in terms of, building leadership, undoing things that, have made them feel inferior, where they don't feel like they're leaders. So building leadership skills, building communication skills so that they can communicate effectively with others, and also even building interpersonal skills, and also giving them the arts within it, because we know we are such a creative people, but we want to be able to use that creativity in ways that help us. So something really well-rounded that goes at all of the different problems that have been created for our children and addressing each one of those, but at the core, first getting them to connect themselves and reconnect to being African.
That's important. We're so disconnected as a people from Africa that to call someone African is like an insult now.
Right.
I did a podcast some time ago that was discussing STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics. And one of the things I was pushing in that podcast was the notion that STEM topics, STEM education, is what really drives economy. If you look at the American economy since World War II, STEM has that STEM field has accounted for over 50% of the U.S. growth. And I'm saying that as we educate our youth, after we establish the African nature of the student, I think we need to start building on the creativity of the student and the scientific mind of the student, because that's where we can build our economy as a group. In your school idea, aside from building the African-centered thinking, what else are you planning to do as far as subjects go? What else are you planning to establish?
I'm planning to establish the core subjects. One thing I don't want to do is I don't want to make it so like, okay, this is math, this is science, this is social studies. I think part of, from some of my research, part of what we've done is taken on some of, the ways in which Europeans have set up the educational system where everything is in its own box.
Yeah.
So really kind of teaching it in a more fluid way.
Yeah.
So like history, for example, our history is in everything. So when we're teaching math, we're teaching science, we're teaching reading, I won't have a specific subject for history. It'll be within every single course. So mathematics and science will be one together, where they're learning about, because they're so infused. And when you look at how even the Kemites, in Kemet were able to, how they structured their way in which education was taught. They had reading, they had writing, and they had math, and they had their science, but the math and science were, because they're so connected, were kind of taught in line with each other, per se. So I definitely, that's definitely part of it. And also definitely having the STEM, because me, myself, I've taught myself coding. I recognize the importance of it. And even, because I just was working on a report for ethnic cleansing, and showing how the Detroit bankruptcy, how that was part of the ethnic cleansing of African people in different places around the United States. Mm-hmm. And in my research, there was a woman who had created this program for this private company within Detroit. And the program allowed them to see, okay, where the foreclosures were, where blight was, so they can go over there and remove, where they need to go over there and remove things, where land was, and which land, and what was profitable, so which one would be more profitable. So she created this system for them, and she's an African sister, that allowed this private European-run company to go in and have it easier to go in and gentrify. But she created that program for them. Mm-hmm. And then, as she mentioned in the research, mm-hmm. she eventually left the job, and I guess, she wasn't feeling fulfilled, and, she might have, because now she started to see how the city was changing and how African people were being affected. And so that's a case in which she created, we as a people create something to solve European problems of how they're going to get rid of us, in a way that we could have created that for ourselves instead, and we could have used that as a tool to maybe fight against it
exactly,
and help ourselves.
Yeah.
So those things will definitely be part of it. I mean, and that's kind of the way that I want to structure my school in terms of having the math and having the science and also having the arts and the technology and incorporating our history throughout all of it. So, and also having going on trips into, so that these kids are not just getting this, but they're also being able to go out in the real world and explore these things and see them firsthand for themselves.
Mm-hmm. So I, just to let you know, I'm an adjunct lecturer at one of the local colleges here in New York, right? And I teach biology. And one of the things I noticed, and it really irks me, even Europeans suffer from this in these colleges. When they teach science, for example, they tend to teach science as its own separate entity. So chemistry is here, biology is here, math is here, physics is by itself. But the truth of the matter is, in science, it's all interwoven. You have to know a sufficient amount of chemistry to do biology. You have to know enough math to do biology. So it's all interwoven, but the way it's taught in the European system of learning is you separate the sciences, and so students don't even realize that what they're doing in biology was something that they actually learned in chemistry or something that they learned in math. And they suffer in biology because they never made the connection with the other sciences. So I'm happy to hear that your curriculum is not going to be European-based in a way it approaches these topics, but it's going to be, I guess, more African-based where it's all interwoven together, right?
Right.
So, yeah, I really do appreciate that approach. I mentioned Umar Johnson. I didn't really mean to mention him, but if you could, have you researched how to go about starting a school?
I have. I've been researching, because I've worked with curriculums a lot, and I've been researching that, and I've also been researching different styles in terms of like the ways that people run school. Actually, 2 summers ago, I guess, I went and visited. I don't know if you know Baruti. It's hard for me to say his first name. I always get it wrong. He lives in Atlanta.
Okay.
He runs his own independent school. He used to be a professor at Morehouse.
Okay.
But he decided to leave, and he's been running his own independent school for a long time. So I went and visited his school and had conversations with him about how he structured his school. How did he come to the point where he decided to start it up, and what are the different structures? And also, there's this conference called the Sankofa Conference that happens in D.C. every year at the beginning of April. Actually, this year it's going to be from the 6th to the 8th.
Okay.
It was a really great conference. I went there last year for the first time. But also there are a lot of other educators there who also have started their own school. So I've been doing a lot of networking around that. And then there's the independent council for independent schools, independent black schools.
Okay.
And yeah, I think that's what it's called. So they also have a lot of resources online. So I've been definitely researching and seeing the different models and the ways in which these schools have been set up, because I want to really make sure that when I create it, it's something that's sustainable, that we're able to teach what we want the way we want to, and that we're able to financially support the people who are going to be working for the school and support it so that it lasts and it doesn't go into any financial strains and has to shut down after, being around for such time, because I know that's what's happened to a lot of our independent schools.
So the thing with the Umar Johnson thing that I mentioned, that I learned is that black folks are very much in support of a school. So, once once you have it planned, I'm sure you could get the support for it. And, once you get that going, by all means, appear on my show. Let's talk about it some more. If you need help in raising funds, for example, and you need to get the word out there, we'll be down because, black folks really do want a African-centered school. And that's why, the Umar Johnson thing became such a thing, because black people do recognize that the school system that's currently there isn't for them. I did a show some time ago with Jay Edgar talking about the school-to-prison pipeline. And for you personally, were you able to see the school-to-prison pipeline play out during your time as a teacher?
I think that I think I was able to see it to a certain extent, but not to a great extent, even though I know it definitely exists.
Right.
I do, I was able to see how most of the time you had our kids being disciplined, I guess to a greater extent than other kids, in terms of like suspensions and things like that.
Right.
And then also just the ways in which these teachers who are not African, and sometimes who were would interact with our kids in ways that were very aggressive and really were filled with a lot of preconceived notions and stereotypes, in which were very combative. So as to see them view these students as like criminals before they, without even saying it, but just in the way that they interacted with the students.
Yeah.
So I was able to see it in those ways.
So then you are definitely equipped with all the knowledge of why a school like the one the one you described to us today is so necessary in the community. Please pursue that idea, because we need to flood the market with as much African-centered curriculum schools as we can, right?
Right, absolutely. And
No, go ahead. Mm-hmm.
I was just going to say, and I definitely think that it's very important to build the community support around it, because I do know that, and even in some of the things that I've learned about schools, that some of the financial issues that they've come across, like independent schools, is because when you have an independent school, your kids have to pay to go there,
right?
Unless you're getting some kind of like grants, and then if you're getting grants, what companies are you getting them from,
mm-hmm.
or are you getting government grants? Because then there's people's expectations in which what they want you to do with it come into play. And so I do know that it's important that even though the community does want those things, funding them as a community, and maybe that's why the whole Umar Johnson thing is the way that it is a lot, because I know that our people, we want these things, but I think sometimes when it comes to supporting them, we may not be able to support them in the ways that we want to, because we would love to send our kids to a school, but we really can't afford it in those ways.
Right.
But then also wanting to put that out as a priority in terms of, okay, I'm willing to spend this much and not spend it on something else. I'm willing to spend this much money on that education for them because it's that important. So I think that's really another part of it too, is really getting the community to not just want to do it, but willing to support it financially. And then also getting people, those who in our community do have the funds, the businesses, and people who own a lot of businesses or who have a lot of income, who use their money to support other causes, but don't use their money to support things like African-centered education. So I think holding people in our community accountable for being part of funding what we know is a necessity for our children.
So there you have it, listeners. If you're paying attention, building a school is one thing. Having it have a African-centered curriculum is one thing, but your support. You see, it's not just to donate to have it built. I mean, anyone could put up a building, but it's continued support. So that's something that we need to consider. And whenever we hear someone come along who's talking about building a school, we have to also hear them talk about how is it going to be sustained. And that's one of the issues with the Umar Johnson School. He never talks about how it's to be sustained. On the other side of the bump, I'm going to take a quick station ID. On the other side, we're going to talk with Miss Roberts about her other endeavors. So stay tuned for that.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
Peace, family. This is Oni, inviting you to listen to the pro-Black perspective, where Black problems are addressed with Black solutions.
Welcome back to the Bitter Medicine Podcast. Today, our guest is Ms. Natasha Roberts. She's an educator. She's also a part of a few different initiatives that affect certain aspects of the Black community. She's a person we wanted to have on because we don't get to see a lot of sisters today, I think, being very vocal in the community and talking about things that affect us. And she's also an educator, and I wanted to be able to talk to her about the Black or the African education movement, and I wanted to talk to her about some of the other things she has going on currently. Natasha, you mentioned to me before that you have another initiative called Melanated. Is it Melanated Mavens?
It's called Melanin Maven, so like the term melanin.
Melanin Mavens. Melanin Mavens, that's
yes.
right. Melanin Mavens. Can you tell us what that is?
Well, Melanin Mavens is a company, a lifestyle brand that me and my sister started about 2 years ago, where we connect African people to their African history so we can empower them, because we believe that once you are empowered, then you're willing to do. So we do this through events. So we have 2 series that we've done and that we're relaunching because we took a couple months toward the end of last year and the beginning of this year to regroup, and we're going to have our 2 brunch series in the summertime and our Black Love Revolution event in the fall. But our brunch series is called Consciousness Brunch, where we connect your African history to your natural hair. So we help you understand the politics behind, how wearing your hair natural is a political statement, how it's part of your culture, what that looked like before you were here in America, how it looks like on the continent, how that's part of your culture, and how it's something that we need to continue to do, not just right now when this is something that is being put in the mainstream, but as a community to continue to do it because it's part of who we are and it's part of our culture. Once the mainstream decides that they're not going to put it in, that doesn't mean that we let it go, because then you're letting go of part of who you are in your culture. Mm-hmm. So that's what we do for that. And then the Black Love Revolution series that we have is teaching Black women and men how to deal with different issues that we have as African people within our love lives, within the process of mating, and helping them to understand the ways in which our relationships are affected by this society and the different things that this society does to put stresses on our relationships, because we have to understand that our existence here in America is a different experience than other non-African people. And so how that affects our relationships and how that affects us being able to create strong African families, and how that also contributes toward, our ethnic cleansing, our genocide, and the whole push for us to be with anyone else who is not Black. So really helping us to understand those things, and then making it a space where African men and African women can discuss these issues, find solutions, and, meet someone who they can possibly get into a relationship with.
So,
and then we also do curate content online as part of it, too, so that we'll teach you about different things that you may have not known that will be something that's empowering to you.
Okay. So there's a few things I want to kind of unpack there. Let's go back to the natural hair thing. When Black men, I see this on the internet all the time, when Black men mention Black women, keeping their natural hair, displaying their natural hair, there's a lot of pushback from Black women about that. Can you tell me, because sometimes I think I know and then it seems like I don't know. Can you tell me what it really means? Like, does it really encompass when people talk about natural hair?
Well, when people talk about natural hair, it's talking about, wearing your hair in its natural state. Now, one thing I will say is that, we have this sister who has tons of years of experience, who does the brunch with us, who does the portion of connecting your hair to your history. But so really, we're the only ones saying, okay, we have to say that we're wearing our natural hair. Other people who are not African are walking around where Europeans wear their natural hair all the time. Asians. Mm-hmm. And so for us, and these other people, but for us, we have to say that we're wearing our natural hair, and those other people are just being. Do you understand what I'm saying? And so for us, we have to understand that, we're calling it wearing our natural hair, but we have to we for ourselves have to understand that what we're doing is just being who we are, mm-hmm. and not doing anything to try to be someone else or try to emulate someone else, so that we're showing our kids that being yourself, your full African self with your hair, your skin tone, everything is great and it's important, and that's part of who you are. And that's part of practicing your culture. And so when we talk about natural hair, we're talking about wearing your hair in its natural state and being proud of that, and teaching other people to be proud of that. And also, part of the reason it's called Conscious Kings Brunch is because that's why we bring the history part into it, because we want you to start to understand how your hair is connected to your history, and how it came to be that now you have to call what you're wearing its natural hair, and then have that open it up to you understanding the situation that we are in as a people in general. So building up your mind, but using your natural hair as the catalyst for it, kind of like what Marcus Garvey said, take the kinks out of your mind, not out of your hair.
Mm-hmm. So, like I said, when Black men mention this, I see this online all the time. When Black men talk about this, women push back heavily. How much pushback have you received from sisters like yourself?
We haven't received any pushback, actually. We've been very well received every time we do one of our brunches. The last one we did was in D.C., and we've done a couple here in New York. We've been well received. People will say, well, when's the next one going to happen? Or if they missed it, they're like, okay, can you let us know? And there's other people who want us to do it in the places in which they live. So we've received a good amount of feedback. We haven't really received any pushback. I think sometimes what happens is, as women, and because also men are able to come too, because I've seen young African men who have come to school with a perm.
Right.
So, and I'm just like, okay, so what's going on here? Mm-hmm. So that's definitely, it's an open space for them too as well. But I think sometimes what happens in terms of pushback is when you're telling people, like we were talking about, to reconnect to who they are as an African person, but everything in terms of being African, in terms of the images that they've shown you, have been negative. So you're looking at it as a negative thing. So people don't want you to tell them to do something that they feel is not going to make them look great, or is something that is, or they view as something that is negative. And especially when men, I think, sometimes, because we live in such a patriarchal society and there's so much of this like feminism and all this other stuff going on, that, when men sometimes say something to women, it's, people can view it as an attack, when sometimes it's not. And I think that, even though there are things that, men can be saying in genuine ways without having any malice or anything behind it, that women can sometimes take it like that because of the type of society that we live in. And I think that it is important for sisters to teach sisters, and, then have that be reinforced sometimes by men afterward, because of the way that the dynamics are, because we are not in our cultural society where we have the right relationship between men and women. Is very combative in this society, men and the way men and women deal with each other.
Yeah, that's true. There is a tug of war between black men and black women, which brings me to the other thing you talked about with the endeavor you have, Melanin Mavens, with your sisters. And maybe I might have to have you and your sisters on in the future to discuss this a little further, because we've been trying to work on a Black Love podcast show for KWAZ Radio for a while now. And it's been so difficult to get some, young men, young women who want to talk about, Black love as a revolutionary thing. The fact that we need to promote the black man with the black woman. When you are in your endeavors, it seems to me like some of your events allow for black men and women to come together and have open and honest conversations. Is that true, or am I misreading that?
No, that's absolutely true. And we want and we encourage, especially at the one that we did, what we had is we had black men and women write down different issues that they have in terms of, the way that they may look at black men or the way that they may look at black women. And then we would read those questions. We'd have a discussion. We'd let the men talk. We'd let the women talk. But then we would have an elder who kind of facilitates it and who's had experience with dealing with some of these things, then shed some light on it, draw some context, and then help to come to a solution. And so we want black men and women to be open and honest, because that's going to be the only way that you're able to solve the issue. If you're trying to play it lightly or pretend that, it's something when it's really not, or not be honest with it, you can't work through it. So we need you to be as open and as honest as possible, so that we can actually address these issues. So yes, that's exactly right.
You used a word just now that I love to hear, and I think it's something that those of us who are trying to serve our community, we always need to have this word at the forefront of our minds, and that's solution. If you had to give one statement on the state of things between black men and black women from a love perspective, what's the one solution type statement you can that you can provide to us here today?
So one statement for a solution?
Yeah, as a solution for the problems that we're seeing between black men and black women when it comes to sustained relationships.
I would say that one solution is that, I guess it's okay. This is going to be like a little bit of 2 or 3 solutions, but into one.
Okay.
But I think it kind of like I think that one, we have to be willing to put the work in. Mm-hmm. That we have to understand that it's going to be hard. So we have to be willing to put the work in, and not to say like, okay, this is too hard, I'm done. Like, I don't have to deal with this. Like, I'm done.
Right.
And so that's one. I think in seeing it more as communal, as opposed to seeing it on an individualistic, on an island by yourself type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Because as African people, our relationships have never been individualized in which the way Europeans have set it up, where it's just you and your partner and that's it, and it's on an island. But having it be where it's more communal. And so I think those two things are important, and I think the way that you do those things is by educating yourself on, what, and that's also part of what we get to, what the relationship, mating, love per se looks like outside of this society, right? Within our cultural context, what does it look like? And so once we understand that, if we're going to be operating as African people, we need to understand what that looks like. We need to understand what we're, how we interact and the type of cultural and society in which we create love and mating and how that works. So I think we need to be willing to put in the work and make it more communal and educate ourselves about what it's supposed to be, because I think there's a lot of different messages sent out about what it's supposed to look like.
That's interesting how these things flow into each other. So we started the show talking about education, and then we started talking about natural hair, and now we're talking about black love as a revolutionary concept. And all throughout, it's about education. It's about giving ourselves, especially youth, the knowledge of being African first. And I think that's so important, that permeates every aspect of our being. Once we understand our Africanness and we start applying our Africanness to all aspects of life, I think that's how we will win in this, in this war that we're engaged in right now. And I think black love is one of the most potent forms of retaliation as far as this war is concerned. When we learn that black love and what comes from it, being fruitful and multiply, when we learn that, we will learn how to defeat the system that's set to keep us down. Malcolm X used to talk
Absolutely.
about, he used the analogy of a cup of coffee. If you add milk to the coffee, you dilute the coffee in color, and you take away its potency. And what we're seeing a lot in the black community, as far as imagery and stuff goes, we're seeing a lot of interracial type, relationships being pushed, particularly white men on black women. I notice when you turn on the television, that's all you see now. It's always a white guy kind of dominating a black woman. Do you guys ever discuss that type of imagery or imagery in general?
We haven't discussed that.
Mm-hmm.
When we do our ones, we focus on, black men and women and what things are in place to kind of make their relationships not work. But I will say that that is something that I myself have been working on figuring out how to address. I just had this conversation with my friends a couple of days ago, and then I was, I'm thinking of doing an event around it, because I think these are the kind of conversations that we need to be having, especially as young African people. Mm-hmm. We're not having these conversations that are dire to us, and I think that is a big issue. And so, as I was mentioning before, how they're teaching you that to be with any other person but a black person as an African person. So, and one of the things that comes to mind is this film that I've been thinking of in connection with all of this is Rabbit Proof Fence, and it talks about how in Australia they breeded out the Aborigines by bringing in Europeans.
Yes, it is.
To mate with them and breeding out the blacks. So, and seeing that, and for us to understand this as a tactic of ethnic cleansing and genocide, like Martin Luther King has this quote that says, the ultimate aim of racism is genocide. Mm-hmm. So you have to understand that this whole system is not meant to keep you around.
Mm-hmm.
It's meant to eventually get rid of you.
Mm-hmm.
And so what are the ways in which it can get rid of you? What are the ways in which these people are seeking to get rid of you? And how can they do it? What are the different tactics? And so that whole interracial dating thing is part of the tactic. That's how they did that with the natives. They did that with the Aborigines in Australia, and they're pushing that now.
Absolutely.
And so I think that's a serious conversation that we need to have and recognize, because we have to understand that when America does something, that they're not doing it for your good as an African person. So when you start to see these things, you need to ask yourself, why are they pushing this?
I agree 100%, and that goes back to the education thing, to be able to spot the tools of war that's being used against you. To try to breed out the Aborigines in Australia, that's a monumental effort. It's hard to breed out blackness, and because if you ever listen to Dr. Francis Cress Welsing, and you could talk to anyone who's a scientist, they'll tell you that black is dominant when it comes to genetics, and to breed that out, you have to do serious work. So it tells you that you have a serious desire to exterminate a group of people when you start doing things like that. And I think our people, we don't see the nuances of war. We don't see, we think that it's just a TV show. Oh, it's like Scandal. It's a white guy bedwenching this otherwise amazing black woman, right? Smart, gifted black woman, but he's bedwenching her out. But we just see that as drama, as TV, but we don't understand that there is a psychological component to that. And we start to see more and more black women and black men looking to other groups to procreate with and to build families with. And I think that that stems from the fact that we ourselves as a people don't educate our youth to see those pitfalls and to avoid them.
Right, absolutely.
So it's going to be a necessary thing for us to talk about black love in a revolutionary way. This is why I would like to, even before this show is done, I'd like to invite you and your sisters, if you like, to discuss your event and the idea, the concept of black love being revolutionary. Speaking of revolutionary, did you have something you wanted to add?
Oh, no, I was just going to say that one thing that just a little side note that, I'll say sometimes when I'm having conversations with my friends is, how do you build a strong black family? How do you build an African family? You need two African people. Otherwise, it's not an African family.
Right.
And so, when people would like to say that, oh, okay, well, I still, I'm still about my people, it's just that you can just love anyone. That's not true, because you're conditioned. The society creates your outlook on what love is and how mating is and who you should look to. So you're operating with conditioned mind. And two, if you're looking to continue to build your people up and you say that you are about that, then the only way to do that is to have a strong African family. And the only way you can have that is having two African people who mate and have that. There's no other equation. 1 + 1 = 2. That's it. You can't just say that, it's something else. Mm-hmm. So that was, that's all I wanted to say.
Our mutual acquaintance, Oni Tase, from the pro-black perspective, he had a quote that went something, and I'm paraphrasing, went something like, the racism narrative makes a lot of people breed themselves out of thinking they are breeding out racism. So let me repeat that. The racism narrative makes a lot of people breed themselves out thinking they are breeding out racism. And so we have to learn and teach each other that interracial, relationships and whatnot, you're not getting rid of racism by doing that. There's a lot of black folks who believe that if they get with anyone else, I'm fighting racism. That's not fighting racism. That's actually supporting it, right?
Right. Yes. And one thing that Utrice Lead, who's an African journalist, said about when people view that as a solution is that they have to remember that European will always be the standard. So you're in a system where European will always be the standard. So it doesn't matter if you get into a relationship with someone who's European or non-black. Understand that they're not going to want to get back to black because European is the standard.
Right. So you could do all the commingling you want to do with Europeans or what have you. At the end of the day, they're still going to apply and enforce their standard. So you're not fighting racism. So in fact, engaging in more black relationships, more black love is actually a very revolutionary thing, and it's one of the most, if not the most powerful tool you have against this system of so-called white supremacy, right?
Right.
We're going to take a quick station bump for station ID. On the other side, we're going to talk to you about your work with, speaking of revolutionary, we're going to talk about your work with political prisoners. So stay tuned.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
Peace, family. This is Oni, inviting you to listen to the pro-black perspective, where black problems are addressed with black solutions.
Welcome back to the Bitter Medicine Podcast. In today's show, we're talking with Ms. Natasha Roberts, and so far we've been talking about the need for black-centered education, and that led us into talking about the revolution of black love and how important it is to first identify your Africanness, and then that will permeate through all aspects of your life. In the last segment, we left off talking about being black revolutionary, and that leads us into this segment where we're going to talk about the work that Natasha does with and for political prisoners. Natasha, can you give us the name of the organization you work with?
Yes, I work with the NEPPC, the Northeast Political Prisoners Coalition, and we work to support political prisoners legally, to support their families, visit them, raise awareness, teach other people about them in order to gain support and have campaigns to free them, because our goal is to free them all.
Yes. Have you met any political prisoners personally?
Yes, I have.
Do you mind sharing?
Yeah, sure. I've met, I've met Ramona Africa, and also Consuelo Africa, who had been released. They were part of the Move 9, the bombing in Philly where they bombed the whole house of the Move 9, killing men, women, and children. And Ramona Africa was one of the ones who survived that bombing. And even though she survived that bombing and had burns all over her, they still imprisoned her. And I've also met Sekou Odinga, who was the head of the BLA, the Black Liberation Army, who helped free Assata Shakur. And he was recently, I think about 2 years ago, released from prison after the Sekou Odinga Committee fought to get him out, raise awareness, get the campaigns out there, and do all the work that needed to be done to get him out of prison. Also, Maliki Shakur Latin. I worked on a committee to help get him out of prison. He was also a member of the Black Panther Party. And also Jalil Muntakim, who is still imprisoned. who we're working on getting out. Robert Seth Hayes, also, who's still in prison, who we're also working on getting him out. And there's currently a clemency campaign for Jalil Montequin, and also a health campaign to get Robert Seth Hayes out, because there's a lot of different things that, in terms of health issues that are done to create health issues for the prisoners, and also lack of medication and lack of access to the things that they would need to treat the conditions that they have, as ways for them to, get rid of and have our political prisoners die in prison. So those are just some of the political prisoners that I've met.
So, of the political prisoners that you've met, this is a question that I think the viewers can gain something from. What have you noticed that's common in all of these political prisoners that you've met? What have you noticed that's like a commonality that a lot of people might notice who've also worked with these political prisoners?
I think the biggest thing is that they're not shaken. That even though the system has imprisoned them for over 30, 40 years, has tortured them, has done everything that they can to get them to denounce their stance or to feel defeated, that they are not shaken and not moved at all, and that they are still steadfast in doing the work. They're doing the work behind the walls to continue to help us as a people, and they're doing it even when they come out of prison. So that's that's the biggest thing that I've noticed, because I think that when people think about it, they would think that, how they wouldn't be able to, I guess, to believe that, after all those things that, these people have gone through, that they're still able to be as strong and steadfast in the work as they are. But they are, and it's amazing.
That's interesting, because, I think about this from time to time. The truth of the matter is, any one of us who is being vocal against our oppressor can be a political prisoner. I mean, any and every one of us. In fact, as you know, late last year, the FBI released this terminology called the Black Identity Extremist, right?
Yes.
All of the people that you have met who have been political prisoners, they would be considered Black identity extremists. And a lot of us out here today would be, and probably are, labeled the same. Based on what you've seen in these cases and stuff like that, is there any way for the defiant blacks, the ones like you who are putting in the work, the ones like myself who are trying to build communication around black empowerment, is there any way that you can sidestep this persecution, or is it a thing of, once you're in the works, you're just susceptible?
I don't know that. Well, one thing I want to say is the Black Identity Extremist thing, when it came out, realizing, because I do the work that I do with political prisoners, how much it's pretty much it's pretty much almost the same thing as COINTELPRO, which was an FBI program created to, as they said, to dismantle, interrupt, and terminate these groups and African people who were fighting the system. So that's one thing I think people don't realize, that there was such a program that targeted these people who are political prisoners, so that they can frame them, so that they can kill them, and so that they can destroy any type of organization and unity and power that black people build up. Yeah. So I think that in terms of sidestepping, I don't know that there's really any sidestepping, just because, you're in war. Right. So, in war, war tactics will be used, And people who are in power and who do not want you to take away their power are going to do everything in their power to make sure that doesn't happen. So I think for us, what we need to do is we need to learn and look back at, the tactics that have been used against our people when they do step up, when they are fighting, and learn, okay, what we need to do to adjust and to, what's the word I'm looking for? Combat the attack on us, those kinds of attacks on us when they do happen.
So, once again, Onitaise, the host of the Pro-Black Perspective, he and I did a show some time ago. You could go back, for those who are listening, you could go back and listen to us talking about COINTELPRO 2, which was the BIE movement of the FBI. And, one of the things we discussed then, and I'm trying to talk about with you now, is we have to learn from the past, right, to know how to prevent things in the future. So I guess my question just then was, when I said, how can we sidestep it? I guess a better question would be, is once it's being presented, once someone is being identified as a black identity extremist or whatever, what can we do? Like, in the work that you do for these political prisoners, what can be done to eliminate these 30, 40, even sometimes 50-year prison terms that our people are receiving just because we're speaking out against our oppression?
I think what we could do is I think the one thing that we don't realize is that community support is so huge and important. And so that, let's say when there is, if you are being targeted and they put some bogus charges on you or something and you're having a court case and people ask for you to come out and be there at court case to show how much the community is behind you, that we can do those things. And that is very, very important. And then also when you're asked to write letters to your senators or write letters to docs or write letters to so putting pressure on local city council people to make that a priority. And then also having lawyers who are willing to do this type of work. So having a system set up already so that if this does happen, we have lawyers in place. The community is going to be there when we call on them to show the support. And the community is going to be willing to write and put pressure on those who, quote unquote, represent them, to put pressure on those who are controlling, who are the judges, who are, the prosecutors or whoever it is, to put pressure on them to not go through with this or to combat this charge, whatever charge may be put against a person who is fighting for the liberation of African people.
So you said something there that made me think to ask this question. Are there a lot of lawyers who are willing to do this work?
I think that there are some. There are a few, but not enough. I mean, we definitely need a lot more lawyers and a lot more of our people, African people, who are willing to do this work. Because I know that, like if you think about it, like for example, Martin Luther King, he went to prison plenty of times. Mm-hmm. But, there was always a strategy of, okay, where if he went to prison, this was what was going to happen, how we were going to get him out. And I think that there used to be, lawyers who are willing to do this work, but it's diminished over time. And so it's very important for us to have those kind of lawyers, and I don't see that there are many right now.
Do you think the number of lawyers diminishing is due to the standstill that you're seeing in a lot of these cases of political prisoners? Like Mumia has been in jail now about 40 years. Is it because the system has that so locked, so tight that you're not getting a lot of wins, a lot of victories, and so lawyers start to bow out? Or is it strictly monetary? Is it that they're not receiving enough money for their time? Is that a part of the problem?
Now, I'm not really sure which one it would be. I do know that, because the system is so entrenched and everyone is so connected with one another, so that even though, people may think that, oh, this is an independent prosecutor. I mean, because sometimes independent prosecution does work, but this prosecutor is just a prosecutor and they're not connected, and it doesn't connect to a higher level of the government. I think because it's so entrenched, I think that's definitely part of it.
Mm-hmm.
And then I also do think there may be the monetary part, because that's one of the things that we do. We have to raise money for legal funds, and it's expensive to do a lot of this stuff. Just even to file papers, like to file different papers, you have to pay so much money.
Yes.
So, and then you have to raise this money because it's not just going to fall out of the sky. So I think it's a little bit of a mix.
Interesting. So when you're a political prisoner, I imagine that you suffer bouts of low morale, depression. One of the things that you're doing is you're encouraging folks to write letters to political prisoners, correct?
Yes.
Can you tell us more about how that is done, and how can people get involved in that endeavor?
Well, the way that I do it, I decided that, what we should do is have once a month a political prisoners letter writing workshop or class or event, whatever you want to call it, where you learn about political prisoners. You learn that America does in fact have political prisoners, because they will teach you otherwise. And you learn what they are, what they've done, what they've fought for. And then after that, you get to write a letter to them. Sometimes it may be a birthday card or a letter letting them know that you know about them and that you support them and you would like to get to know more about them and things like that. And it really does help. I haven't met a political prisoner who has said that they don't appreciate the letters. I mean, everyone that I've spoken to says they appreciate the letters. They appreciate people, knowing that they're in here and that and communicating with them. So it's definitely something that's important. And if people would like to be involved with it and would like to come to the next class, you can just email me. And I should have a flyer up for February coming soon with a date and location. I will post it on my social media and on my Facebook page. And you can email me if you would like to come, or if you decide to follow me on any social media, you'll see the date and time and place, and you can come. And the materials are provided, and we'll teach you about the struggles of political prisoners and who they are, and allow you time to write to them and things like that.
So be sure to give them your email address here.
Okay, yes, I will. Should I give it now?
Yeah, give it now.
Okay. My email address is Natasha, so Natacha X, the letter X, Robert, Robert, @gmail.com. So that's Natasha X Robert @gmail.com.
Great. So now, guys, if for those of you listening who want to get involved, email Natasha to get more information. I think it's a good initiative, and I find it interesting that the system allows political prisoners to receive mail. Is that something that's by law that they have to allow, communication, or is that something that the system has overlooked so far?
No, it's by law. And I will say that there are people who've been working for political prisoners and ensuring their rights for a long time. And so even though we don't see it in the mainstream, this work has never stopped.
Right.
And so that's how they're able to get their packages, get their mail the way they're supposed to, and be able to get the visit that they get, because there have been things done by the state to try to, infringe upon their rights. But there's always been a consistent effort to make sure that the word is put out there and that we fight against anything that looks like they're going to try to infringe on their rights. So it is part of the law, but, they have tried to, create new laws and change laws, but there's been a consistent fight to make sure that those things stay in place and that they're able to get these things.
Well, changing laws and moving things around is a part of the military strategy against us anyway. They will always do that. Maybe 2 years ago, I remember there was reports that Mumia Abu Jamal had failing health because the state wouldn't allow him to receive his treatments or his medications and stuff like that. Have you worked any with Mumia?
I haven't worked particularly with Mumia. I've gone to a couple of the rallies that and fundraisers for him. So I've done those. So I've donated to his committee, and I've gone to Philadelphia to rally in front of the courthouse and supported the things that he's done in those ways. And I do know that they were able, because they pushed and they had a huge campaign around getting him his medical treatment, that they were able to do that. But I do know that he is still in a dire position in terms of health wise. Because once one thing is done, then there's another thing that they come at you with. So
right.
I have learned that in the recent weeks that he is in dire strength when it comes to his health.
That's so sad. They allow letters and stuff. What else can the community, people who are interested, what else can they do? Can they send, can they put funds on, on their account? Can they send foodstuffs? What else can, the listeners do if they want to do something in addition to letter writing? Is there something else they could do?
Yeah. Now, I will say that once you start writing a political prisoner, and you build that relationship with them, you'll be able to, work it out with them, whether you can come visit them or not, when, if you can send them money, if you can bring them a package, and then also they can also teach other people in their communities about political prisoners, because once it's important for you to spread the word, because that's what we're doing. We're trying to build awareness so that we can build more of a movement behind political prisoners, so that we can get them out and put more pressure on the state to release them. And also read up more on political prisoners, join organizations that are working toward helping to fight against the imprisonment of our freedom fighters. So there's all those different things that they can do in terms of not just letter writing, but also educating themselves and educating others, and then building a relationship with these political prisoners so that they can go visit them and send them money, and donate to organizations who are already, sending them money and doing the work. Put in the volunteer, if there's an organization that is putting on something for political prisoners, volunteer there, things like that.
And it's possible to speak to political prisoners while they're behind bars, right? Like you can call and speak to a political prisoner?
Yeah, you can, but it gets tricky sometimes, because sometimes there are lists that you have to be on, and then there's like a certain number, and so there's like all of these different things. So it's a little bit more tricky to speak to a political prisoner over the phone. Okay. But like I said, if you build a relationship with them, then you'll be, be able to access those to see what other ways in which you can communicate with them beside letter writing.
Okay, well, we would like to work. I would like to work with you in the future as far as the letter writing program, because I would definitely like to connect with some of our elders who are paying the price for us right now, who are behind bars because of what they did out here on the streets when they were civilians. So I'll definitely like to be involved in the future.
Oh, also, I was going to say that people could also organize their own fundraisers if they want to, in terms of raising money for political prisoners, as well as also writing them birthday cards, because when their birthdays come up, so instead of writing a letter, you can do a birthday card if you wanted to. And also, a lot of the political prisoners have written books, have come out with CDs. So buying, because like Mumia, for example, he has books. Sekou Odinga, he just recently came out with a book called Look for Me in the Whirlwind. Jalil Montekim, he has 2 books out. And so there's political prisoners who have gotten out and who are still behind the wall, they've written books and done CDs. So that's another way that you can support them, by buying their books and buying the things that they've done. And then, so like, for example, like Sekou Odinga, he's a political prisoner who's been released, an ex-political prisoner, but he goes around to different places, colleges, universities, organizations, to speak and educate and let people know. So, if you want to have him or any other political prisoner who's out here come and speak to your people, your organization, your church, or wherever, have them come out for speaking engagements as well, hand out literature, and do the research.
Sekou Odinga is the brother. His son was in that group with Tupac, right?
Yes.
Gaddafi, right? His son died.
Yeah, his son did. Yeah, his son did pass away.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I saw him in an interview. I want to say it was with Sway in the Morning. But what you just gave was a good idea. Is there a central website where all of these political prisoners currently in X where you can go and you can support them that way, where they have, everything that they've done, their books, their CDs? Is there a website that celebrates that?
Well, there's a Northeast Political Prisoners Coalition website, .wordpress.com.
Okay.
That's the website where you can go, and the website for a lot of the political prisoners will be on there. So you can go to their particular websites also to find out more about them and the things that they've done. So I don't know if you want me to spell out Northeast Political Prisoners Coalition for your audience.
Yeah, please.
So that they can go to the website. So it's NORTHEPOLITION.wordpress.com.
Mm-hmm.
And there's also the JerichoMovement.com. So JerichoMovement.com, the JerichoMovement.com. And those places you can go and you can find the different websites for all the political prisoners, and then also information on the different political prisoners that exist.
So that's your guys' homework. Head over to those websites and support. I mean, like I said, political prisoner could be any one of us. That could happen to us any day, just for the fact that we stand against the war movement against us. Natasha, we could probably talk for about 3 hours. We've spoken for about an hour and a half now. But I definitely would like to have you on again to discuss the curriculum, the African-centered education, the school. Definitely like to have you and your sisters on to talk about the Melanin Mavens and the the fact that Black love is revolutionary and it's something that we all need to engage in. And we probably could even talk another time even further about the work that you're doing, that you're involved with our political prisoner brethren and sistren. So if you don't mind, can you give the audience all the ways in which they can connect with you via social media?
Yes. So you can find me on Instagram at Natacha _X. You could also find me on Facebook at Natasha Roberts, but I also have my personal page, Miss Natacha X, and also on Twitter at Miss Natasha. Miss _ Natasha X, and so that's Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and then I recently started a blog. I've got 2 posts on there so far, but I'm building it up because I literally started a couple of weeks ago. But I'll also start putting things up there on my blog as well, and it's Miss Natasha X at WordPress.com. .wordpress.com.
Thank you. I was going to end this conversation asking you if you ever considered blogging, because we have a companion blog site called www.bittermedicineblogs.com, and we could do with more Black women being vocal, just in general. And I was going to invite you to blog with us as a guest blogger sometimes. You could consider that if you want. But definitely, guys who are listening, make sure to check out Natasha's blog. Natasha, I referred to you by your full government name a few times. Is that a problem? Because I noticed that you use the Natacha X
handle.
Handle. Yeah. Is that a problem that I mentioned your full government name?
No, it's not.
Okay.
That's just my handle. Eventually, I do plan on changing my name to an African name, so it's okay.
Okay. So, once again, thank you for appearing on the show. I hope we can get you on again in the future.
Yes, sure. Yeah.
Okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, that was Natasha X. That's what I'm going to call you now. That was Natasha X here, discussing a lot of initiatives she's involved with. And I think you guys should check it out. All of the information concerning her social media and the organizations that she works with will be in the description box. Please make sure to follow Natasha and to get involved. We need people to get involved in every aspect of life when it comes to the African community. Wait. Before I go, just a reminder. And this is, I guess Natasha can also hear this as well. We have the Bitter Medicine. The Bitter Medicine podcast has its own think tank, a WhatsApp group. Just go over to the Bitter Medicine podcast page on Facebook. You'll be able to find the link on Facebook and on Twitter. And you will be able to come into the think tank group. We talk a lot about curriculum, but we talk about everyday news that affects all of us globally in the diaspora. So please join in. We need more voices. We need more female voices too, by the way. So Natasha, wink, wink. We also, as I mentioned before, we have the GoFundMe going on. We're just simply trying to get to $2,000 to improve upon the broadcasting experience that we have going on. So please check into that. You can find the links to the GoFundMe all over our social media. And I just want to say thank you all for listening. We'll be back to you in a few more days with another new podcast, and we hope to have Natasha on in the future. So thank you very much. Until next time, this has been the Bitter Medicine Podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast with your host, Koku. If you like what you just heard, We hope you pass along our web address, bitamedicineblogs.com, to your friends and colleagues, and share our show to all your social media. Be sure to check out our archive section on our website for previous podcasts. This has been a KWAZ radio production. Join us next time for another session of the Beta Medicine Podcast. Follow us on Facebook at Beta Medicine Show, Twitter, Beta Meds, Tumblr, Beta Meds, Instagram, Beta Medicine.